Welcome back everyone. The M1 Macbook Airs have been out for not quite a year yet, but a couple of things have changed, so let's go and take a look at this specific MacBook in 2021. Now what I can tell you is that the M1 lineup, including the M1 MacBook Pro, M1 Mac Mini, and M1 iMac, they are really some of the best MacBooks and Macs you can buy. And here's the main thing you have to keep in mind. Even with the M1 MacBook Air, you may think, oh, it's the cheapest one or whatever. Apple has spent so much money developing the M1 chipset that they're not going to go ahead and just jump straight to M2 or M3 or whatever soon. Like, it's not going to happen like in the next year or two. It's probably going to be within like 2-3 years. So this M1 chip is still going to be extremely relevant from now until like the end of the MacBook lineup. These are completely different than the Intel chipsets. And here's the main thing to keep in mind as well. The M1 chip, if a MacBook has it or a Mac has it, performance is probably going to be about the same. I have an M1 MacBook Pro, I've had the M1 iMac, I've had the M1 MacBook Air, and they all pretty much perform about the same. There's some differences here and there, but theoretically they all pretty much perform exactly the same, which is the main thing to keep in mind. Now the M1 MacBook Air I love because it comes out in a couple of different colors. You have the gold model, which by far is one of my favorite MacBook colors of all time. You have the silver model, and you have the space gray model as well. Now I personally bought the space gray model, but I am a huge fan of the gold one, and if I had to pick one up, I would way rather have the gold M1 MacBook Air than the space gray or silver one in my opinion. Now there's a couple different price points for these MacBooks, and they all kind of change depending on which specific configuration you get, if you want more storage, less storage, but the base model is $999. There's also another model with a $1249 price tag, but for me personally, I bought the $999 Model 1, the $1,000 one essentially, and I think it's pretty decent value. Of course you get the base model storage, which is something I hate doing. I ended up not keeping it. I have the M1 MacBook Pro as my main device, but this chipset inside of it is crazy, which I'll get into in a second. The exterior still looks beautiful. You have a USB Type-C port on the side, and that's really pretty much it on the outside. There's really not a crazy amount else going on. You have two USB Type-C ports, if I forgot to mention. Now flipping it open, you can see we have that beautiful 13.3-inch Retina display, and it's still by far one of my favorite displays out there. It's about the same thing as the M1 MacBook Pro. I don't even know if there's a difference. Both of them have True Tone, but I just love this specific color of this MacBook, especially for the display. It looks good, the colors look great, and overall, even from a 2012, Retina MacBook Pro to this display, the Apple just makes such good displays that you're just never going to want to update. I've had, laptops back in the day that as soon as I buy them, they already look outdated. I've even owned a lot of monitors that I'm like, this thing doesn't really look that good. I'll be honest. I'll probably upgrade in a year or two. But anything that Apple touches, including their ultra-fine 5K display and these Mac displays, they are just so good. And it's easily one of the best advantages of picking up a MacBook like this for sure. Now you have the full-size keyboard on the bottom. This is not that messed up one. This is the updated one, and it still has been holding up, perfectly fine, and I'm sure a lot of people haven't really been complaining about it a whole lot either. So that's another pretty big thing to keep in mind. And then you have that trackpad on the bottom, which I love, Force Touch and all that. I'm in love with these, type of trackpads, and that's why I have a Magic trackpad, because I just love using it. And that essentially covers it up in terms of the outside. Now, things like battery life and all that stuff has been, reported all across the board, and you probably already know this, but it has been one of the biggest highlights for this type of device. Getting a, MacBook like this that just has battery life that can last all day is an amazing thing. Now, it doesn't have a fan, so that is one thing I've heard that kind of some people do complain about, but because of the M1 chipset, people have been finding out that this MacBook doesn't really overheat that much, which I love. I love MacBooks not overheating. I hated my 16-inch MacBook and my, MacBook before that because they would overheat all the time. That was my biggest complaint. With these ones, very rarely do they overheat. Sometimes they do, I'll be honest, which I'll get into in a second, but a majority of the time that is not the case. So that is something I always love, and it's something I just don't have to worry about anymore. And the battery life, because of its size and because of the M1 chip, it's been very optimized that it just doesn't really degrade that fast over time either. And it doesn't die super fast either, so that's another big thing to keep in mind too. And I feel like I've said that 30,000 times in this video. Now ending it off with a chipset, this is the biggest advantage of picking up this MacBook, because exterior wise, it's been about the same since the previous, couple MacBook Airs that came out before it. Now this MacBook, that M1 chip, it has that 8-core CPU with 4 performance cores and then 4 efficiency cores, and it also has that 7-core GPU option. But there is that other, upgraded M1 MacBook Air that has that 8-core GPU option. Now, I don't know if there's going to be that big of a difference. If you're somebody who's doing a lot of crazy stuff on your MacBook that needs a GPU, then obviously getting the 8-core option may be better, but you still have 7 on the other one. And from day-to-day use, I can tell you, for a lot of people who are probably going to end up buying this MacBook, it could possibly be overkill, to be honest. And it's funny because this is the cheapest MacBook that Apple makes. And even this one may be like the most overkill one, who knows? Because this chipset is such a big improvement from Intel, it's a pretty cool thing. But here's the other thing, I'll be honest, I don't want to oversell it too much because it's not perfect. I think a lot of people have been saying that, this MacBook is like the perfect MacBook for everyone. It has no problems. It definitely has a lot of issues. Even with my personal M1 MacBook Pro, I constantly have to restart it probably like once a week. I have to fully hold down the power button and everything. And because it's still so early in its life cycle, it's just going to have a lot of problems. I think obviously it's not that big of a deal. Things like this happen all the time. You can have a super old MacBook and still have a lot of problems in terms of software, but because it's still, a new chipset, there are going to be things that, still need to be fixed over time. So I just want to kind of put that out there. I would not recommend buying this MacBook and expecting there to be no problems at all, because that is not going to be the case. You are probably going to have a few issues here and there, but you're probably not going to have an issue when it comes down to the performance segment. And that is where this thing is just killing it at. I mean, it just does a really good job at really anything you throw at it, especially if you use Apple products. If you're somebody who uses Apple products like Final Cut Pro and, Logic Pro and all these different things, Safari, all the Apple products, you are going to have a very good time because these, applications are suited for this specific MacBook. And here's the biggest thing. I kind of look back to phones like, this kind of, just stay with me. I look at phones like the iPhone 6S, right? That came out in 2015. And that phone is still being supported by Apple, but a lot of the stock Apple apps perform pretty well, much better than you would think for like a 6-year-old phone. And these MacBooks end up doing way better over time than, iPhones. I look at the 2014 MacBook Pro or even the 2014 MacBook Air, which is kind of a stretch, but even that's like not that bad of a MacBook. I just reviewed that one and that really isn't even that bad on, in 2021. So this MacBook with a stock Apple chipset, you're getting the best of both worlds, and this thing is probably going to last for like 10 years easily if you really wanted it to. For as long as the software lasts, that's how long this phone's going to last in my opinion. So in terms of that, to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, is the M1 MacBook Air still worth it in 2021? I will say absolutely yes. This MacBook is still completely worth it in this day and age. I think it's just a very good MacBook for people to pick up. I really don't think it's perfect, but it gets the job done for the most part. And I've said that a lot, but this is one of those devices that if you pick up, you don't have to worry about, will it be good 2 years from now or will it be outdated, 5 years from now? Probably it's going to be outdated, the day after you buy it, but it's definitely a good MacBook. It's going to be extremely relevant for the years to come. And from the reviews of everyone coming out with it, it seems like it's very good. But after me using it for a couple of, since it came out, I can tell you it's definitely not perfect. There's some issues here and there. I will say there's less issues overall than like my iMac that I had or my Intel MacBooks before. But I think for a majority of people out there, like I mentioned, it is almost like overkill to buy this MacBook. It's just so funny because it's the cheapest one. I would recommend everyone to buy it. It's a very good MacBook. And for a person who's beginning in their career or even beginning at college, you can buy this MacBook day one of college and keep it with you throughout the whole entire college and have a very good time having it. So that's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.